years. So anyway, without any further introduction, here's Peter Oundjian.
Shall we?
I'd like to get a gauge of how many orchestra subscribers there are in the room. Can you put your hands up? Wow, that's good. Okay.
Very nice.
I was doing some research a few weeks ago that had nothing to do with this talk, but I came across an article in the June 1913 issue of Musical Canada. And a guy called J.S. Haddon was writing about conductors do nothing but wave their hands in front of the orchestra. He talks about how in Bach's time and in Handel's time, an orchestra didn't need a conductor, that it would be the first violinist who would conduct, or somebody from the harpsichord or a fortepiano. And then he goes on, and I'm quoting, "Orchestral scores have now become so complicated and overloaded that this primitive method would never work. Yet, there are times when I feel that with a fine orchestra, long accustomed to play together, and familiar almost to contempt with the classics that they are playing, a lot of the conducting nonsense is sheer superfluity. Give the players their start, indicate an occasional rallentando or accelerando, and that is all they want. I have made a point of watching orchestras, and I am bound to say that they hardly ever look at the conductor. Why does he sweat so? Why does he gesticulate so?" So I'll ask you that question, Peter.
Oh dear. Oh, it's just one word, really. Exposed. I think that's actually, it's very funny because to some degree, a lot of that could be true. And I mean, in truth, I think every time a conductor gets up on a podium and conducts an orchestra that doesn't know that person, doesn't know the conductor, it takes them a few seconds, literally a few seconds, to decide, we're going to be able to follow this guy or gal, or we're just going to play this week, and that's it. And it's like a horse from that point of view. You know, they say that horses know within a few seconds when somebody gets on them, and whether they really know how to control that horse or not. And that's the truth of it. So all of that can be done. You know, just look for the beginning and then play away by an orchestra. But the problem is that they can't really give an interpretation. If you're going to go and hear an orchestra actually give an interpretation of whatever piece of music it is, then it's really crucial that they are in touch with what the conductor is doing with his hands and his soul. And you know, you would watch Bernstein sometimes, he would stop conducting and they still knew exactly what he wanted. It was the nature of the personality. So as far as them not looking, actually, it is sort of true that you don't have all the string players just staring at, obviously they couldn't possibly memorize all their music, but it's incredible how their peripheral vision, a combination of peripheral vision and this almost kind of molecular connection that takes place. When an orchestra is really in sync, it's a little bit like, you know, you shove the water and it all moves. It's that feeling. It all goes together in a wonderful wave. So, I mean, certainly conductors didn't really begin until when? Somewhere in the 1800s. You know, Beethoven it was one of the earliest people to compose music that really started to need a conductor. And the music of Haydn would not really have had a conductor, would be the leader.
Right.
For sure.
And conducting is actually only a fraction of your job in terms of what you actually go to work to do every day. There's fundraising, there's planning future seasons, there's figuring out which guest artists are going to come. This is all part of the mix as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of work that obviously is behind the scenes, and just putting together a season. I mean, of course, there's a wonderful team of an artistic team that helps do everything, but you have to have really important concepts every time. You want to make every season look new in some way. I mean, next season, as many of you know, is our 90th anniversary, so that has a particular look to it, you know, bold, big number, bold season, we call it. But in every case, from the moment I arrived, I thought, how can we make this a little bit more than just week after week we play some kind of program? You know, how can we make this kind of more of a celebration of something, like celebrate the opening of the season, and then just have some nice programs, and then celebrate some kind of a festival, like we did the Slavic festival last fall, and give people something specific to look forward to. Oh, and to talk about as well. So I love festivals. I think festivals are exciting.
Well, you've just finished a festival last night, the New Creations Festival, which is, I think it's one of your more significant accomplishments with the symphony. Whereas instead of having the old pattern where there's a new work at the beginning of a concert, and then the concerto, and then the symphony, that you actually decided to sort of create a critical mass of new music and present all new music in a concentrated form over a multi-concert program.
Yes.
So this year it was John Adams, and you had some Canadian composers as well.
As well, yeah. Murray Schafer. Well, you talk about, one of the things have always been aware of is that the worst thing you can do to new music is put it at the very beginning of a program, especially in the kind of new music that it's really challenging to listen to. But we played this Murray Schafer symphony last night. Now, Murray Schafer is an extraordinarily gifted and wonderful human being, but he's also got a tremendous sense of humor. And about 20 years ago, he was asked by the Toronto Symphony to write a piece, an opening piece, the typical thing, we have to commission some kind of Canadian piece, so we'll put it at the beginning. And so he said, well, tell me just how long should it be? And whoever it was at the time said, well, no longer than 10 minutes. So he sent them the piece 6 months later, and the title was No Longer Than 10 Minutes, which was just great. So I called him, and we've had this discussion, John. I think the problem, if you had only 8-minute pieces of Beethoven and Mozart, they'd be good. They're still wonderful, but they would never really give you that sense of what that creator is capable of. And so I've been very insistent on giving contemporary composers an opportunity to really write a major piece. And just last night, we did Murray Schafer's, what was it, 35 minutes, something like that? 30, he called it, again, it was a conversation with our artistic office. They called him and said, Mr. Schafer, we're going to print next week. Could you tell me what your piece is going to be called? Because I'd said to him, write a major piece. I don't mind what it is. Just make sure we can play it in Roy Thompson Hall and not on the roof of the CN Tower or whatever, which he loves to do. But and so he said, oh, you want a title? Because he hadn't started writing the piece yet. But he didn't say that. He said, oh, okay, well, how long do I have? He said, well, we're going to print... it would be good if you could just tell me now. And he said, oh, all right, Symphony No. 1 in C minor. And that'll do. And then he thought about it, and that's what went to print. And then he thought about it, and that's what he wrote, a symphony that kind of had a little bit of an adventure in and around C minor and ultimately C major. So you never know what inspires a creative artist. Right. But you're right. We did have John Adams. Yeah, that was that was wonderful last week. John Adams, who's written Nixon in China, and I'm sure you're familiar with his music. And he was there for both concerts last week. And we did this Harmonielehrer, a piece he wrote in 1985. Just a really wonderful piece of music. And Cité Noire. Yeah, the festival has taken on a little bit of a life of its own. I think when I started and I said we were going to do the New Creations Festival, some people are a little skeptical. And I remember having the feeling that it was going to be hard work. Somebody said at one point that I'm ghettoizing new music. I thought that was kind of amusing, actually, because if you do a Beethoven cycle, nobody says you're ghettoizing Beethoven, right? But when you dedicate 2 weeks to new music, suddenly that's the ghetto. That's the writer puts it in the ghetto, actually, not me. But it hasn't turned out to be that way at all, and people get very enthusiastic about it, and it's a real celebration of what is going on today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to ask you, I want to backtrack a little bit and ask you about how you became a conductor. Most people who follow chamber music know the work that you did with the Tokyo Quartet, and it's not really a logical progression to go from being the lead violin in a quartet to being a conductor, and it probably has something to do with also your journey back to North America. You're born in Toronto, you're raised in England, and then in the mid-'70s you ended up coming back to North America, and it kind of starts there, doesn't it?
Right. Actually, the first time I really understood what a conductor could do and the difference a conductor could make was when I was about 10 years of age. And I was at school in a little town called Purley in Surrey. And one day, our choir master We were about 15, 16 kids in the choir, and we sang, quite well, and we rehearsed seriously. He said, next week, Benjamin Britten is coming to listen to your choir, our choir, because he's considering recording this song cycle called the Friday Afternoon Songs, and he wants to find a school choir to do it with. And we just could not believe this. And sure enough, Benjamin Britten walks in. Now, you've got to keep in mind, this is 1966 or something like that. I mean, most people above the age of 30 completely disapproved of the Beatles, even though they were getting very famous. So Britten was still the most famous musician in England at that time. And to have him walk into the room was just overwhelming. And then we were singing these songs, and he started conducting us. And of course, we suddenly sounded completely different. And I began to understand what somebody's energy could do to a group of musicians. So we actually did record those songs and several other things with Britten. And then, so I always had this interest, as you have always had, in choral conducting initially. And I sang chorus a lot as a kid growing up. And then when I came to Juilliard, you always had to have a second study. So I decided to take conducting as a second study. And actually in my second year at Juilliard, this is 1976, we were told that Herbert von Karajan was coming back to New York, and he had not been in New York almost since the war, I believe. I mean, there had been really a lot of friction. And this was a very big event, and he wanted to give master classes in conducting at Juilliard. And I was the concertmaster of the orchestra. And there were all these solos, and I was so nervous because, he was not a large human being from the point of view of stature, but I've never come across such a giant in my life. Honestly, it was incredible, the power that frame held within it.